So the motion in front of us today is not about whether or not we support immigrants or refugees. It's about one particular issue that's gone unresolved, and that is the irregular border crossings that are taking place, especially in places like Laval, Quebec, and in Emerson, Manitoba. And the Liberal government has mismanaged this issue. A country ultimately has sovereignty over two things: people and a geography. And by mismanaging our borders, the government is weakening the sovereignty of the Canadian state. And by failing to address this problem over the last 2 years, they have created a host of other problems. First, we have seen a significant increase in spending to process people crossing the border regularly. And they have had to significantly increase spending to provide for social services for people in Quebec. $173 million more for processing, $180 million more for social services, and this is just the start. The cost could spiral into the billions of dollars, all the while the government is not delivering on the spending it committed to Canadians on repairing our nation's ailing roads, bridges, and transit infrastructure, and all the while running much higher deficits than they promised. And they've also created another problem. Because they've had to divert money and resources away from regular immigration and refugee processing in order to process these people crossing the border in Quebec and Manitoba, there is now a backlog of some 45,000 applications for privately sponsored refugees. And I'm told the wait times for processing are now 7 years. There's now an 11-year wait time for the processing of asylum claims. And the problem is only going to get worse unless the government supports the motion and takes action to address this problem. Last year, we admitted some 20,000 people who crossed the border in Emerson and in Laval. This year, it could well be north of 60,000. To date, about 6,000 people have crossed at those two locations, and this summer, they're projecting some 400 people a day will be crossing. We could be looking at 60,000 people this year who are crossing through non-normal channels, a fifth of our overall immigration intake. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Speaker,
Canada has had an orderly, planned, controlled, and safe immigration system. Our immigration system has for decades been controlled through the vetting and screening of immigrants. And as a result, we enjoy very high levels of public support for immigration and for refugees. As a result, Canada has one of the highest intakes of immigrants and refugees in the world. The two are linked: orderly, planned, and controlled immigration and refugee resettlement, and high levels of public support for those systems. This is not true of Europe and the United States. For example, in the United States, for decades, they have had no control or planning of their immigration system. U.S. administrations and U.S. Congresses dating back to the 1980s have failed to deal with their challenges of irregular border crossings and people entering the country illegally. And as a result today, the United States finds itself with some 10 million people who have entered irregularly and who are without documentation and without papers. And it is causing huge problems. And the problem is, in some ways, unsolvable. And so we do not want to go down that path here in Canada. And the same is true of Europe as it is in the United States. And that's why I'm supporting this motion. We need to maintain high levels of public support for our system, and that begins by maintaining an orderly, controlled, and safe immigration and refugee system so that Canada can continue to benefit from the world's brightest and the best, so that we can continue to receive and welcome the downtrodden and dispossessed in this world. And there's a final reason, Madam Speaker, why I'm supporting this motion. What if the shoe's on the other foot? Let's not forget the 2002 Third Country Safe Party Agreement, the 2002 agreement between then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the government of then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the administration of Bill Clinton came about because of the horrific events of September 11th, 2001. And we were under an inordinate amount of pressure from the Americans who wanted that agreement in place and who had the cards to play in those negotiations. And we managed to keep the borders open to trade so that we could continue to grow our economy. But what if we go into a severe recession? What if the housing bubble pops and we see a reverse flow of migrants, irregular crossings from Canada to the United States? We will have no leverage to deal with an American administration that wants the problem fixed. And that's why the government needs to sit down with the U.S. administration, talk about this problem, and find a solution to these issues in Emerson and in Laval, Quebec.
Questions and comments?